10. Killing the date. Jack Shepherd was 31 years old when he met a girl off the dating site OkCupid. Her name was Charlotte Brown, but unfortunately for Charlotte, she wouldn't live past their first date. When the pair met in December, Jack took Charlotte out for a nice dinner at a restaurant in London. The two made a lot of jokes and laughed a lot. They drank 2 bottles of wine together, and afterwards, well, things got a little steamy. Jack invited Charlotte back to his houseboat, which he had parked on the River Thames. And this is where Jack went from a charming and handsome date to a deadly ship captain. Once back at the houseboat, Jack suggested that the couple take a midnight drive up the river, but not on the houseboat, on a speedboat that he had bought previously. Neither one of them wore a life jacket. Both of them were wasted, and the boat wasn't in the best condition, as Jack floored it, going well over 30 knots. That's about double the speed limit in the river. A tree trunk came out of nowhere. The boat smashed into the floating tree trunk. The boat capsized, and both Jack and Charlotte fell into the river. This ended up being the worst first date in history. Jack was rescued a little bit later, found clinging to the hull of his boat for dear life. But as for Charlotte, she was found much later, unconscious and unresponsive. By the time she finally got to the hospital, she was dead. 2 years after this terrifying incident, Jack Shepherd was put on trial for manslaughter by gross negligence. Apparently, he was so drunk during their date that he couldn't even remember Charlotte's name the next day. The police investigation uncovered that he had taken at least 10 women out on his speedboat as part of his seduction routine. Hopefully it was worth it, because Jack got 6 years in prison for what he did. 9. The Bad Duck Boat Captain. 63 felony criminal charges were recently laid against 3 employees who had been present during a tourist boat accident in July of 2018. The accident took place on Table Rock Lake in Mississippi, and it resulted in the deaths of 17 people. Charges were laid against the captain, the general manager, and the manager who was on duty the day of the incident. The captain himself faces the most charges, 29 in total, with 17 of them being first-degree involuntary manslaughter. As a licensed and experienced captain, he took the duck boat onto the lake in the middle of a thunderstorm. As you can probably guess, taking tourists sightseeing on a lake during a storm is a bad idea. The thunderstorm generated winds similar to those found during a hurricane. The winds were so strong that the boat flipped over and 17 people were killed, and all because the captain wanted to make those tourist dollars. We don't know how long the captain will get in jail, but with 17 cases of manslaughter, he probably won't be on another boat for a long time. 8. The Bluebell. The Bluebell was a twin-masted sailing vessel based out of Fort Lauderdale in Florida. Its captain was a pretty bad guy. In fact, he committed mass murder back in November of 1961. The captain's name was Julian Harvey, and before the horrifying incident would ruin one family's life forever, he was a respectable yachtsman. To understand what happened, we need to go back to the summer of 1961. The Duperrault family had been saving money for years to go on a special one-week cruise on their very own private yacht. They traveled all the way down to Fort Lauderdale from Green Bay, Wisconsin. They went down to the marina where the Bluebell was stationed and paid $515 to rent it out for their trip. They then hired Julian Harvey for $100 a day to be the captain of the vessel. They also hired Harvey's wife to serve as the cook. Everything seemed just perfect, and they set sail on Wednesday afternoon, November 8, 1961. The last time the vessel was ever seen, they were sailing out of port. Several days later, when their trip was coming to an end, Julian Harvey set the boat on fire while his guests were asleep, jumped into a dinghy, and floated away. He was found a few days later and told police that it was a freak accident that destroyed the ship. In reality, Julian Harvey had killed everyone on board so that he could collect a massive insurance policy on his girlfriend. But don't worry, he didn't get away with it. One of the Duperrault children, young Terry Jo, was discovered alive several days later, and she testified to witnessing Julian burn down the vessel, killing everyone on board. 7. The Medusa. The story of the Medusa is one of incompetence and cannibalism. It goes back 200 years to the summer of 1816. The frigate Medusa was on its way to Senegal, carrying French officials to assume control of the country following the fall of Napoleon the year before. But unfortunately for everyone on board the Medusa, it was captained by a very incompetent man who hadn't been at sea for 20 years. Before they even made it to Senegal, he ran the ship aground. And because there hadn't been much thought into the preparation of the voyage, there weren't enough lifeboats for the 400 crew members and passengers. Those on board had to build a makeshift raft, which they then towed with what few lifeboats they did have. But here's where the story of the Medusa gets absolutely insane. Not only did the captain cause all this because of his incompetence, but then the prestigious folks in the lifeboats were fearful that the makeshift raft would slow them down. So they cut the ropes and abandoned the 147 people on it. What happened next was horrifying. The 147 people turned into complete savages, eating one another, throwing weak people overboard, and just trying to survive. They weren't picked up for 13 days, and when help finally arrived, only 15 of the original 147 were still alive. Back in Paris, 5 died, and only 10 were left. 6. Captain Coward. His name is Francesco Schettino, but people these days simply call him Captain Coward. He recently started his 16-year prison sentence that he earned for abandoning a sinking ship that ended up killing 32 people. He was the captain of the Costa Concordia back in 2012 when it crashed into some rocks off the coast of Tuscany. The dramatic collision ripped a huge hole in the hull of the ship, at least 160 feet, 48 meters wide. The engine room was flooded, the ship listed toward the island, and within just a few hours it was underwater. To this day, the Costa Concordia is the largest passenger ship to ever get wrecked like this. It had 2 times more passengers on it than the Titanic did when it sank. But just what exactly was the captain doing while his guests were scrambling for their lives? First, we need to back it up. Back to before the accident occurred. Captain Coward actually steered the ship too close to the island to impress his girlfriend. The bold move, this captain's terrible ego, is what caused the crash. Then, once the crew members on board realized that there was no getting off the boat, they began to evacuate the 4,000 passengers. But as they were doing the evacuations, the captain was already off the vessel and as far away as he could get. The guy sneakily escaped, abandoned his ship and his passengers, and then refused orders from the Coast Guard to get back on his ship. He literally just ran away, and it was this ridiculous cowardice that got him charged with manslaughter, causing a shipwreck, and abandoning his own vessel. 5. Manslaughter in California. The captain of the MV Conception was recently indicted by a federal grand jury and brought up on 34 counts of manslaughter. But not just normal manslaughter. He was charged with seaman's manslaughter, something reserved for the worst sea captains. His name is Jerry Niall Boland from Santa Barbara. He caused the deaths of his 33 passengers and his 1 crew member by being inattentive and negligent to his duties. The vessel was anchored near Santa Cruz Island when a fire broke out, engulfed the entire boat, and caused it to sink. Since the 33 guests were sleeping below deck when the fire happened, they were all trapped and ended up either burning to death or drowning. The only people who escaped were the 5 crew members above deck and Captain Boland. The captain was charged with being negligent because he failed to have a night watch keeping an eye on the vessel, because he failed to conduct fire drills, and because his crew was not trained for emergencies. Nobody knew what to do when the fire broke out, and the crew panicked and jumped into the water to save themselves. The captain, whether he meant to kill these people or not, is now facing 10 years in federal prison for each count of manslaughter, which equals 330 years. Safe to say that guy will never see the ocean again. 4. Valentina Gonzalez. Valentina Gonzalez Medina was a 21-year-old university student who was killed while practicing amateur diving in a serious case of boat captains gone wrong. Valentina was with her partner diving in the sea about 900 feet, 274 meters from the beaches of Isla Colón, near the Colombian city of Cartagena. Because she was underwater, she couldn't exactly look up to see what was going on around her. When she tried to rise to the surface, a guy on a yacht passed directly over her, causing Valentina to be cut to shreds by the propellers as they buzzed across her head. The young woman was dragged out of the ocean and taken to the nearby beach, but the injuries she sustained to her back and head were unfixable. She bled to death right there in the sand. As for the captain of the boat that killed her, he was gone. This guy took off, speeding as far away from the murder he just committed as possible. Luckily, justice prevailed this time. Well, kind of. The horrible driver of the yacht that killed Valentina was ultimately captured by the police and arrested. His name is Jose Gertrudis Valencia Quintana, but not so luckily, the judge released him without any charges. The whole thing was dismissed as an unfortunate accident, even though this guy had been recklessly driving his speedboat directly over the area where the young girl was diving. In this case, justice didn't prevail at all. 3. Run over at the boat launch. Some people just aren't meant to be boat captains, like the guy who almost ran himself over by his own SUV just trying to get his boat out of the water. This bizarre incident happened at Rocky Point Park back in May. The police arrived at the boat launch to discover this individual's vehicle fully submerged in water with the trailer and boat still attached. The man had been trying to take his boat out of the water when the engine prop got stuck. He got out of his vehicle to see what the problem was, and when he finally got the engine unstuck, his SUV started rolling down the hill. He didn't get away fast enough and was actually run over by his own vehicle. Then, to make things worse, after the police towed the vehicle out of the water, it burst into flames. The poor guy ended up in the hospital, though he did survive with only minor injuries. His SUV was a total write-off. 2. Parasailing mayhem. In more recent news, a boat captain in Florida has been charged in the deaths of 2 tourists. The tourists died during a parasailing trip that turned into the worst day imaginable. Andrew John Santiero is blamed for causing the death of Nicholas Hayward from Costa Rica and Azalea Silva from Texas. The problem that day was that the winds were too strong under Florida law for people to legally be parasailing. But the captain was more concerned with money than the safety of his passengers. He allowed both these individuals to go parasailing, and once in the air, the unthinkable happened. Everything started out okay. The couple were flung into the air. They were parasailing nicely, and then they fell into the water and were dragged for several minutes. Just try to imagine being dragged at high speeds behind a boat for minutes at a time. It would have been terrifying for these 2 people. But we'll never know what their final moments were like because they died. According to the Tampa Bay Times, they were both dragged through the water for about 9 minutes. Naturally, they drowned during their horrifying ordeal. The captain probably won't face any jail time. As the last we heard, he was released after being arrested and posting a bond of $230,000. 1. Pushing past the elderly. On August 3, 1991, the Oceanos set out from London on its way to South Africa. Soon after taking off, the ship found itself in a very violent storm. During the storm, the ship lost power. There was a leak in the engine room, and the chief engineer reported to Captain Giannis Avranas that water was pouring into the hull. The engineer said that flooding would soon short-circuit every last generator. That's exactly what happened, and the ship was soon adrift in the dark seas. What happened next is one of the most cowardly incidents in maritime history. The crew realized that the ship was done for, and so they threw out all standard procedures and fled in a panic. They didn't raise any alarms. They didn't tell the passengers what was happening, but instead packed up their belongings and got ready to run. Captain Giannis Avranas was one of the first people off the ship, before he had even told his passengers that there was a problem. It was the onboard entertainer who had to use a radio phone to broadcast a mayday signal. Luckily, the South African Navy picked up the signal and immediately launched a mission to save the passengers on board. Thanks to the entertainer, a man named Moss Hills, the passengers were eventually saved by helicopters. Seeing as this was the 1990s, nothing actually happened to the cowardly captain. He faced no charges of negligence and was even given another ship to be captain of until he eventually retired.
Number 8. Father versus daughter. It's common to see some kids being disciplined by their parents. While some parents may decide to take some of their privileges away, others may go with grounding them for a few days. But one father took things way too far. He murdered his daughter in broad daylight as a punishment for partying and doing drugs. Ironically, the disciplining father did not have a clean past himself. So, here's how it went down. 49-year-old Patrick Lecage, a real estate entrepreneur from Adelaide, Australia, appeared in the Supreme Court via video connection in July 2019, reaffirming his guilty plea for killing Sabrina Lecage, his daughter. A 20-year-old medical student, Sabrina, was stabbed to death 8 times in her Mercedes-Benz by her own father. He was thrown into a fit of rage when he found out that his daughter had been lying to him about partying and smoking pot. He sat across her on the driver's seat, confronted her, and without a moment's hesitation, stabbed her in her abdomen with a 15-centimeter long knife. He first stabbed her once, but he wasn't done yet. He moved the bleeding girl into the back seat and continued to stab her 7 more times. He then drove around the area for 90 minutes with his daughter's body in the back seat. He was finally pulled over by the patrolling cops and taken into custody. On further investigation, the father's dirty past started to unfold. He had been convicted of heroin trafficking more than 2 decades ago. According to the records, Lecage's drug-related crimes date back to 1996, when he was arrested for selling a restricted substance. In fact, he was unanimously convicted of dealing heroin just the prior year. Lecage was released after serving 2 years of jail time. Lecage was convicted of stashing cannabis in 2007 and was fined $200. As per the previous report, he was fined $100 for failing to keep weapons in a secure container. 2 years later, in 2009, he was found to have planted more than the authorized number of cannabis plants and was also carrying narcotics equipment. He was further penalized $900. The defense attorney Ben Sale had asked the court for additional time to get his client's psychiatric assessment done to gain sentence considerations. Sabrina is today remembered as a beautiful friend and a great student who finished with a 99.35 grade point average. Here's what one of her friends wrote for her. "I can't believe I'm writing this. My beautiful Sabrina, an incredibly talented pianist, high achiever, and a queen of dark humor. I love you." The 2016 graduate of Nazareth Catholic College in Adelaide studied biology and religious studies. she got admitted to the University of South Australia to study classical piano playing and medical imaging. It is quite unfortunate that such a young and brilliant woman had to perish at the hands of her father. Number 7. 9-year-old driver. In an interview with 2020 in 2011, a Detroit dad who had confessed to being drunk and letting his 9-year-old child drive his vehicle went on to defend his parenting. Sean Weimer, 39 at the time, was found guilty of second-degree child abuse for permitting an unlicensed juvenile to drive a motor vehicle. At the end of the trial, all he said was, "I'm not a bad father. My daughter's the only one that matters. I asked her if she forgave me. She said yeah." Weimer was detained after his daughter was pulled over by the cops while driving down the highway with her drunk father in the passenger seat. She informed the cops that he was drinking from a massive bottle of black velvet whiskey and did not even know how much he was consuming. She went on to say that her father had started her off with driving lessons while she was very young. Not that 9 years old would be considered much older. Weimer said the kid drove around their block for 45 minutes before stopping at a gas station to fill up her vehicle. Surveillance cameras captured an apparently drunk Weimer visiting the convenience shop near the gas station and bragging about his daughter's driving abilities. Weimer was arrested by the police when someone observed the girl driving and contacted 911. The eyewitness was apprehensive but pleased by Weimer's daughter anyway. The small kid was taken aback when police stopped Weimer's automobile. The police questioned her, "What are you doing?" And all she had to say was, "What are you stopping me for? I was driving good," recalled Detroit detective Robert Grant. Well, she sure was, but just not legally allowed to. Weimer was already a convicted criminal who had been arrested for DUI, robbery, and handgun possession in the past. He'd said he pled guilty to the accusation of child abuse in return for probation and the avoidance of having his daughter speak in court. At an evidentiary hearing in November, the girl testified that when Weimer asked her whether she wanted to drive, she happily agreed but was a little scared. Weimer claimed it was terrible to see her testify. He maintains that he did not endanger his daughter despite his guilty plea. He explained that it wasn't a kidnapping case, as the residence was just a few hundred yards away, and that they didn't go faster than 25 miles per hour. He further expressed how her seatbelt was fastened, and she wouldn't have been wounded in a million years. Weimer said he was carrying down a family tradition by training her to drive. According to Weimer's attorney, many parents allow their children to practice driving. Some even record the feat and post it on YouTube. The cops condemned Weimer's behavior, and he was permitted to see his daughter only under supervision. He claims to have stopped drinking and is currently attending AA meetings. Number 6. Father versus teacher. The pandemic has come with several unanticipated and unprecedented challenges in all walks of life. For the last 2 years, following the guidelines and abiding by COVID-appropriate behavior seems to be the new norm worldwide. While most people adapted to the new challenge, some took up bad behavior instead. This year, a father beat up a teacher real bad at a Californian school. Why? Because of an argument that sparked over using a face mask. According to the superintendent, Tori Gibson, of the Amara County Unified School District, the event happened just after school had ended for the day. On the very first day of kids returning to school at Sutter Creek Elementary, east of Sacramento in California, the parent-teacher confrontation took an ugly turn. The school superintendent later sent a note to parents outlining what had transpired. The note expressed how they are always bumping along the road when the first day of school comes, particularly at this challenging time. She explained, regrettably, that a parent verbally assaulted a principal, resulting in a physical conflict between him and a teacher who attempted to defend the principal. The brawl started after a parent objected to the school's mask requirement. When the dad observed his daughter come out of the school wearing a mask on her face, he was enraged and confronted the female administrator. An educator stepped in to defend the principal as the conversation got wild. The altercation eventually led to a scuffle and left the mediator bleeding. He was taken to the hospital and treated before being discharged the following day. The nature of the parent's injury was unknown, but he'd been restricted from entering the school premises. The pupil was, however, permitted to continue her studies. Attacks on school staff are not acceptable under any circumstances, the superintendent said, noting that the school's mandates are constantly changing. Thanks to waves of COVID strains and incomplete vaccinations, abiding by the current standards is essential, She clarified that the regulations surrounding mask usage are not made by her, the administration, or the school's instructors. Considering the rising number of children being hospitalized due to the raging Delta and Omicron variants of the virus, wearing a mask in public spaces or gatherings is required in many areas. Number 5. Prank failed. In 2014, a Delhi student came up with a dumb idea of pulling a prank on his father. The part that's dumb is not that he decided to prank his dad, it's how he did it. Let's throw in some background info here. Apparently, his dad is really conservative and religious. Now, keeping that in mind, let's see how things played out. 20-year-old Pratik starts the recording and informs the viewers of how he's going to prank his dad. Well, obviously, he thought the whole prank would turn out to be humorous, but that wasn't the case. He hides the camera and waits for his dad to arrive. While his dad is resting, Pratik, in a shaky voice, requests his dad to keep the discussion between themselves and not to reveal it to his mum. He slowly blurts out that he had mistakenly gotten his girlfriend pregnant. His very traditional and conservative father would not have any of it. He was completely oblivious to the humor. He pounced out of bed and turned his fight mode on. What starts with one tight kick into the stomach leads up to many more power-packed thrusts of punches, kicks, slaps, and you name it, it was all there. Not to forget some of the juicy words that flowed without any check. The enraged and aggressive father abused his son both physically and verbally. Pratik soon convinced his furious father that it was fictitious and just a prank. To save himself, he keeps repeating, "There's the camera." And finally, the pounding stopped, but the bitter mumbling continued. Well, the young guy did put in a lot of effort in building up the tension, but probably it just wasn't the right prank for his dad. We are now sure of one thing that Pratik is not going to do in life: get someone pregnant before taking the vows. Number 4. Hot car. In Las Vegas, a father was detained after police said he walked inside a casino to play for 30 minutes while his baby boy waited outside in an overheated car. According to court filings, Mitchell Hooks, 39, was charged on July 16th with felony child abuse. Reportedly, officers were sent to the Bighorn Casino at 10:15 p.m. after a lady reported to casino security that she had spotted a baby sobbing in a vehicle in the parking lot, all alone. According to the body camera video from the department, a security guard told police that when he reached the SUV, the doors opened, and the infant was screaming and crying. The officer carried the sweaty child, put some cold water on him, and only then did the infant stop wailing. According to the arrest report, the father returned to the SUV minutes later and informed police that he had left his 6-month-old in the car with the window pulled down as he went inside to use the restroom. The driver's window was pulled down 4 inches, while the other windows were up, according to police. Reportedly, it was 100 degrees outdoors at the time. Hooks subsequently emerged that the irresponsible father was in the casino for around 30 minutes gaming, which police validated with surveillance video from within the facility. The infant was later transferred to a hospital for evaluation before returning to his mother. Hooks was released on bail in July, and his hearing is currently in progress. There have been multiple cases of children dying after being left in hot cars. What do you think should be the punishment for this father? Tell us in the comments. And if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 3. Father turns thief. A father had reportedly gone to his child's school to purchase their Pando tickets, then promptly stole back the money he used to pay for them. Damian Brown, 32 at the time, was captured on camera leaning over the counter at Yisgol Emmanuel in Ryle and stealing the £10 note as the clerk was seeking £2 change. The footage was not seen until after he had departed. Brown of Granite Street, Ryle, was reportedly embarrassed by the crime. He and another man had also committed several other thefts, including allegedly getting into store at Ryle's Piazza Center via the ceiling and stealing multiple items of men's apparel, as well as toys from a Woolworth shop in Colwyn Bay, according to the court. Brown acknowledged the theft and the 2 other burglaries, which he committed with the help of an accomplice. They were also seen sneaking into the Ryle businesses on CCTV. Brown was sentenced to 4 months in jail, a suspended sentence for a year after the other guy was dealt with. He was also sentenced to do 100 hours of unpaid community service and enroll in a thinking course. According to probation officer Fergus MacDonald's pre-sentence report, Brown had been unhappy about the breakup of a long-term relationship. They were unique offenses, since most of his prior convictions were for traffic offenses. Number 2. Intruder. After fatally shooting an intruder, a man in South Carolina was arrested for drug offenses. The problem here was that the presumed intruder turned out to be his daughter. Nadja Hermanica Presley, 23 at the time, was killed by her father, Jermaine Tremone Presley, age 43, when she attempted to enter their Greenville house at 1 a.m. in the wee hours of a Sunday morning. According to police, the father mistook Nadja for an intruder attempting to enter their house and fired a single shot through the door, wounding the young lady grievously. She succumbed to her injuries and died on the spot. A lady who has inhabited the area for years and knows the family well felt the gunshot was an innocent mistake on Presley's behalf. Even though Presley was not charged with his daughter's murder, he was arrested the following day when the police discovered narcotics in his house while investigating the shooting. 1 count of possession with intent to distribute heroin and 1 count of possession to distribute cocaine was reportedly filed against him. He was arrested and brought to the Greenville County Detention Center, where he was being detained without bail. Presley was also charged with possessing a weapon during a violent offense and 3 counts of possession of a handgun. According to warrants, he was caught with 3 weapons that he could not keep due to a prior 2004 heroin trafficking conviction. Number 1. Elephant Enclosure. A terrifying video surfaced this year, showing an elephant charging at a 25-year-old man and his child at the San Diego Zoo. According to a CBS News video, Jose Navarrete jumped numerous barriers at the world-famous zoo to grab a selfie with his 2-year-old child when the big tusker came at them. What makes things worse is that the father drops his daughter during the terrifying attack. The footage shows Navarrete just making it past the compound's gate as the elephant creeps in on them before accidentally dropping the toddler centimeters from the raging elephant's tusks. Another witness, Jake Ortale, states, "He runs, throws his baby through the gate, and it's seconds from hitting him. He jumps through the gate, falls on the ground, and then it roars." The baby started crying, and people were just mad at this guy. According to the zoo authorities, Navarrete purposefully and unlawfully trespassed into the elephant habitat. The elephants seemed highly displeased by the deadly joke. According to CBS, the father was charged with child endangerment and was later jailed. Number 9. Chingiz Bekhanov and Nazirke Bekjanova. For a lot of people, it's important that their family like the person they choose to date or marry. This was certainly the case in 2018 for 21-year-old Nazirke Bekjanova, a junior doctor who rejected a marriage proposal from a 26-year-old teacher named Chingiz Bekhanov. Bekjanova had recently graduated from medical school in Kazakhstan when Bekhanov popped the question. She said no because her family didn't approve of him. Bekhanov was outraged. He attacked Bekjanova with a knife while they sat in his car and brutally decapitated her. Then he tried to commit suicide by stabbing himself in the abdomen. He left a suicide note asking that the couple be buried together, but Bekhanov was found clinging to life and was rushed to the hospital in a grave but stable condition. Meanwhile, Bekjanova's body was found in the car. The young woman had just started her first job as a doctor, and she had her whole life ahead of her when it was abruptly snuffed out. People who knew the couple were shocked that Bekhanov would go to such extremes. He really didn't seem capable of doing something like this. At the time the news of the tragedy broke, he faced a murder charge and a sentence of up to 15 years in prison if convicted. Number 8. Amina Barami. Amina Barami's life was forever changed in 2004 when a man named Majid Movahedi attacked her with acid after she repeatedly rejected his numerous requests for a hand in marriage. The Iranian woman screamed in anguish on the street as a crowd gathered around, unsure of how to help her. She lost her eyesight and suffered from disfiguring burns to much of her face and body. Meanwhile, Movahedi bragged to those around him about what he had just done. A court ruled 4 years later that Barami could watch as a doctor stood over the man and poured several drops of acid in his eye. This eye-for-an-eye punishment, known as qisas, is an option in traditional Islamic courts when the victim's family fails to reach an agreement with the perpetrator. Although Barami was blinded in both eyes, the ruling only allowed for Movahedi to be blinded in one eye. This is because women are seen as being worth only half as much as men under the ruling legal system. The survivor told the media that she was happy with the sentence and that she wasn't resorting to the punishment out of revenge, but to fight against the type of suffering she endured. The day finally came to carry out the punishment in 2011. Officials were counting down the seconds until they would render Movahedi unconscious and pour the acid in his eye. Barami had a sudden change of heart and stopped them from proceeding at the last moment. She told The Guardian that Movahedi fell at her feet in gratitude. Up until that point, he had expressed no remorse for what he'd done. She told him to go away and never speak her name again. Bahrami later wondered whether she made the right decision, as acid attacks continued throughout Iran. She thinks that if she had gone along with the punishment, maybe it would have set an example to discourage others from committing the same crime. To add insult to injury, Movahedi was released from prison without compensating Bahrami's family, as the court had ordered him to do. Number 7. Jason Eaton and Wendy Sabatini. One day in 2016, 43-year-old Jason Eaton entered the Greensburg Police Department in Indiana and confessed to killing his girlfriend, Wendy Sabatini. He told officers that he had approached her in her bedroom with an engagement ring. She supposedly turned down the proposal before he could even ask, so he grabbed a gun from the nightstand and shot her in the head from behind. Eaton then went to the home of another woman who accompanied him to the police station. He reportedly told her that he'd messed up and that he thought he had killed his girlfriend. Police went to Sabatini's home and were let inside by her son, who thought his mother was at work. They found her body in a room with a gunshot wound to the head. Eaton pled guilty to murder and is currently serving a 45-year sentence. If he lives long enough to see freedom, he'll do 2 years of probation. Number 6. Leona Linda Taylor and William Walter Franco. It's pretty common for a couple to exchange naughty photos these days. Consequently, there's a growing problem of scorned exes publicizing and circulating nude images of their former lover in a bid for revenge. One of the earliest revenge porn cases to make its way to the courts happened in Hawaii. In 2003 and 2004, a woman named Leona Linda Taylor took revealing pictures of herself at the suggestion of a therapist as a way to help her heal from past trauma. They made their way into the hands of a man she was dating, named William Walter Franco. Taylor eventually lost interest in Franco. At one point, he proposed to her, and she rejected him. She ended her relationship with him in late 2004 and moved on with her life. A year later, she married someone else. It wasn't until late 2007 that Taylor found out Franco had put her intimate photos online and sent them to one of her co-workers. He also posted the woman's personal information, as well as how to contact her. Taylor searched the internet and found her pictures and information on several other websites. She was understandably humiliated and sought therapy as random people began to contact her looking for sex. Law enforcement failed to help, saying that there wasn't much they could do without more information about the people contacting Taylor. So she hired an attorney and sued Franco in civil court for damages relating to the ordeal, which had upended her life. At the time, Hawaii had no laws banning revenge porn specifically, but Taylor's lawyer presented a compelling enough case for the court to rule in her favor, to the tune of $425,000. And while it sounds like a lot of money, it doesn't fully make up for the level of embarrassment she had endured and was likely to still face in the future. Number 5. Turning the tables. A 28-year-old man believed to be from Great Britain stirred up some controversy on Reddit last year when he took to the forum about a marriage proposal gone wrong. He had asked his girlfriend of 4 years to marry him and did everything he could think of to make it perfect. She had said that she didn't want a public proposal, so he made a nice meal at home and then popped the question. The man's girlfriend said that she wanted to marry him eventually, but she rejected the offer because she wasn't ready. He suggested a long engagement, but she still wasn't comfortable with the idea. So he told her that when she was ready for that level of commitment, it would be on her to get on one knee and propose to him with an engagement ring in hand. The girlfriend disagreed and accused the man of punishing her for not being ready for marriage. He asked fellow Redditors for their opinions. Some commenters agreed that the girlfriend should be the one to propose next, while others said that the couple should probably just break up because the sting of the woman's rejection might be too hard to work past. The man admitted that the rejected proposal and how to handle the matter going forward were putting a strain on the relationship. He wrote that he wasn't trying to punish her, but that he had laid his cards on the table. She knew where he stood, so it was on her to make the next move. What do you think? Let us know in the comments below, but hit that subscribe button first. Number 4. Christopher Tucker and Tara Serino. There was something that Fred Serino didn't like about his 19-year-old daughter Tara's friend, 34-year-old Christopher Tucker. But he couldn't stop her from going to the man's home in Berks County, Pennsylvania, one night in 2017. Tara never came home. Several days later, Christopher's father, John Tucker, showed up at Fred Serino's house with some of the teen's belongings. He told Serino that police had pulled Christopher over in Illinois. They ended up taking him for a mental health evaluation because he wasn't making much sense, and they found some of Tara's things in the vehicle. Tara wasn't with Christopher when he got arrested. Her father filed a missing persons report and police interviewed Christopher. He reportedly told them that he had asked Tara to marry him, but she said no, that she was sleeping with other men, and that he might as well kill her. He took her suggestion seriously and strangled her to death. Then he gouged her eyes out and struck her repeatedly with a hatchet. After wrapping Tara's body in a rug, Christopher skipped town. Thankfully, it looks like he won't be getting out of prison anytime soon. The jury found him guilty of first-degree murder last year. Number 3. Kutubuddin Hatimbai Shahiwala. When a 26-year-old woman from Yemen turned down his marriage proposal in 2018, a 28-year-old Indian man named Kutubuddin Hatimbai Shahiwala decided to get creative with his revenge. Knowing that she would soon catch a flight back to Yemen from Mumbai, he called the airport and told them that she was carrying a bomb in her bag. The woman was detained upon her arrival at the airport and was found to be free of contraband. She told authorities that Shahiwala had threatened to cause trouble if she left him and helped to confirm the WhatsApp number he had used to make the false report. Shahiwala had met the woman online several months earlier. He told her he was a wealthy businessman, and she traveled from Mumbai with her father to meet him. She soon learned that Shahiwala had lied about his job and that he actually worked as a mechanic. Naturally, she turned down his marriage proposal. After all, nobody enjoys being lied to. Police arrested Shahiwala at his home and took him into custody, reminding him that no matter how burned someone feels after rejection, they still have to respect the person's right to say no. Number 2. Nikhil Handa. Indian Army Major Nikhil Rai Handa met Shailaja Dwivedi in 2015 when he and her husband were stationed at the same barracks. During that time, Shailaja and Handa became friends. It wasn't long before the married major misinterpreted the friendship as a deeper connection and began stalking Shailaja. He became obsessed with the woman, placing over 3,000 phone calls to her over a 6-month span. The desperate admirer continuously tried to persuade Shailaja to leave her husband and marry him instead. In the meantime, Shailaja's husband, Major Amit Dwivedi, became concerned about the nature of his wife's interactions with Handa. He banned her from having any interaction with the deluded stalker. But the pair went against Dwivedi's wishes and met up one day at the military hospital, where Shailaja had a physical therapy appointment. After spending a few hours walking around together, they sat in Handa's car. At some point, he got into an argument with his wife on the phone. Shailaja remained silent as Handa told his spouse that he was planning to divorce her. When he hung up, he made one last-ditch effort to convince his love interest to ditch her husband and be with him. She refused, and Handa slit her throat and ran over her with his car. He allegedly showed no remorse when police arrested him for Shailaja's murder. Sadly, it's a case of, if I can't have you, nobody can. Number 1. Maria Sadakat. Maria Sadakat was a young teacher at a school in Islamabad, Pakistan. She caught the eye of the school owner's son, who asked her to marry him in 2016. But Maria wasn't interested, and she turned down the offer. Sadly, she paid for it with her life. Shortly after her rejection, a group of men showed up at the woman's home and brutally beat her. They poured gasoline on her and set her on fire, and then just left her outside to die. Maria suffered burns to 85% of her body and ended up dying from her injuries. The man's father and school owner was among the group that viciously murdered her, according to her father. Her aunt told the BBC that the man who wanted to marry her niece already had a wife and child. He wanted her to run the school that his father owns. It's reportedly common in Pakistan for men to kill women for rejecting a marriage proposal. In the aftermath of Maria's death, a village elder allegedly told her father that his honor was at stake. Others urged him to stay quiet about the matter and handle it outside court. Activists are fighting to draw more attention to these so-called honor killings, which go largely unreported. These brutal slayings are often worked out under Islamic laws that were introduced in the 1980s, which allow the victim's family to pardon the murderer in exchange for money or other considerations. The fight for women's rights in Pakistan continues, as religious groups argue that campaigning for equality promotes obscenity. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to see more videos about failed marriage proposals, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Bye!